As I'm setting up my PowerPoint, one thing that Professor Slade said when he started off the presentation this morning is he mentioned, right, that racism is a problem of thought. And what I want to talk about with you all today is how that thought then manifests itself within the way that police brutality is framed, particularly in the media. And so to get into this, one of the things I want to think about, right, we're in a situation right now in an election year where one of the central issues, right, is being framed as if it is Black Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter, that there is an equivalent amount of violence and threat that both of these groups face. And what I want to do today is I want to break down how these frames have come about and show through data how there is not equivalent violence, that this is a false equivalency, and that it's set up in this sort of dichotomous way as a result of a two-party system and a contemporary media environment that filters our media algorithmically towards our own interests. And so to think through that today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about some of an essay by Cedric Robinson that helps us give us some frames for thinking about thinking about police violence and how it's reported in the media. Then we're going to look at FBI data and look at what is actually the root causes of violence against police. What is the state of that problem, right? And then we want to look at state violence towards Black communities through police brutality and use of force. What I'm trying to show here is that these are very separate problems that have been organized and framed so that they seem oppositional and almost in a zero-sum game, that if folks in the Black Lives Matter movement get justice, that somehow weakens or threatens or harms the police. It makes me think of what Professor Farrell said earlier today about what is the fear about. So let's get into it a little bit. If you're not familiar with Cedric Robinson, he's a super influential figure in critical race theory, right, which the president tried to outlaw this past week. Since that and additional attacks on critical race theorists, particularly at Princeton, there was a bomb threat that was threatened this morning, right, on the campus of Princeton. This is the pattern and the cycle of attacking knowledge, of attacking work, and then that turning into a set of, or a reason for violence. And it's sort of a microcosm of what we're talking about here. The piece that I'd like to talk about of Cedric Robinson's today is from 1999, and it's a piece that looks at how the LA Times framed and reported on, or didn't report on, the crack cocaine epidemic in the 1990s. And so the timeline of the events for this article, just it's a fascinating article and the details are really deep, but what I'm getting at today is beyond this. So just to think about this, in August of 1996, the San Jose Mercury reported that the CIA was involved in planting crack into neighborhoods starting in the 1970s. Big newspapers didn't run this story despite significant evidence for it. And then in 1998, there was a revelation with a declassified CIA documents that are released by the CIA Inspector General, confirming a lot of the reporting in the San Jose Mercury. No large national papers really write on this issue, and if they do, they eschew the evidence and then present the point of view of the police. And within the LAPD specifically, Robinson was looking at corruption centered at the Rampart Division, which suspended dozens of officers in the 1990s for planting evidence, for unlawful shootings, for false arrests, for intimidation, for beatings, for thefts, for drug dealing, and for perjury. And so Robinson is asking us, why is there so little national reporting on these open secrets of corruption? Why doesn't the media represent the problem of the war on drugs as one of state violence rather than individual behavior or pathologizing the Black body? And so he comes up with three frames through which that I think the media still uses, and a lot of our work is filtered through, of the way in which police violence is framed for people who do not experience police violence, right? And so one of the things we're thinking about is that if you live in a community that is over-policed, you have the evidence of an experience of what's actually happening. But if you live in the suburbs or you live in a place where the police support your communities, right, then you rely on media representations of what's happening with police rather than having any actual experience with it. And so these representations, and I think what Professor Gale was talking about just before, helps understand how deeply problematic these representations are and how deeply they are engraved all throughout our history going back to the 1600s. But in general, the media frames, right, they're going to report a positive perception of the police from local residents, from business people, right? They're going to center the voices of police officers, and they're going to employ what Robinson calls a quote unquote savage hood frame to explain the context of violence in Black communities. And so what this narrative is building is it's the idea that building on this ideology that poverty is the result of personal choices rather than structured inequalities. And so when paired with nearly totally positive coverage of the police, framing the police as always already innocent, regardless of facts, data, or evidence, this frame then mobilizes racist tropes about Black and brown people's work ethics, intelligence, and morality and criminality to explain and justify the use of force. And so this is an example from Robinson's text of an LA Times article. A complex mix of gangs, violence, and poverty in the crowded Pico Union and Westlake districts make policing there an unmatched challenge. And then Robinson's words, apparently LAPD officers are trained to serve and protect more sedate neighborhoods like Mulholland Drive. And if you're not familiar with LA, Mulholland Drive is a super fancy, rich celebrity neighborhood, right? And so the combination of these media frames is deadly. It promotes and primes affective feelings about the police against the reality of those effects of those same policies and the use of force. And to end this portion, just before we get into the data, Robinson ends this essay by pointedly saying, it is well documented that the largest consumption of controlled substances occurs among the affluent in this country. We can only surmise that the LAPD has as much difficulty in policing Mulholland Drive as it does Pico Union. Apparently around Mulholland, cocaine is a supplement of creativity. At Pico Union, it merely fertilizes the jungle. And so what we're seeing here, and what Robinson is challenging us to see, is how the same problem is framed in very different ways in terms of the media construction. So how is the problem of police accountability constructed today? Well, one way to think about it is that the state keeps very, very, very detailed statistics on law enforcement officers who are killed and assaulted in the line of duty. This is called the LEOKA database. It's updated every month, and the last month's update noted that 37 law enforcement officers have been reported feloniously killed in 2020. It's up 3 officers from last year. 8 were the victims of an ambush or an entrapment, and 2 were the victims of an unprovoked attack. 33 law enforcement officers have been killed accidentally so far this year. So that can happen in a variety of ways. But so let's talk about these 37 lives and what led to their deaths. Was it Black Lives Matter? Was it Antifa? Was it an organized conspiracy against the police? Well, according to the FBI statistics, no. And what makes this problem solvable is that they collect so much data on harm coming to police officers. We know the deaths per year. We know the months that it happens and the time of day that these deaths happen. We know the regions that it happens in. We know the circumstances of every single death, right? We know exactly where in the body the bullet or the knife entered the police officer. We also know, right, the type of weapons, and we even know the height of the perpetrators, right? And beyond that, the other thing we know is that 31 incidents, right, which led to 31 victims, all of them have been cleared, which means that the person was either apprehended or that the person was shot in that incident and lost their life. But there was no outstanding criminals running around missing from police accountability or justice. When we dig down into the 2019 data, every year they issue a very deep report. And this is really the crux of what I'm trying to get us to think about today. These are statistics about the offenders over the past 10 years who have committed felonious acts that have led to the deaths of police officers. What we find in this data for 9 years now, right, that there has been 1 attack on police officers because of an anti-law enforcement ideology. That the rest of the deaths that have come to police officers is because of their work in the line of duty. right? And so we can think about what would solve this: poverty programs, drug assistance programs, a myriad of programs we can think about eradicating poverty and these interactions that lead to police death, right? Additionally, right, we note that most of the people who attack police are white. And so we understand here we have a problem with white masculinity, we have a problem with gun control, and we have a problem with the multiple roles that police are asked to fill. Now, just really quickly to go into the data about mapping police brutality, this is what the FBI gives us, right? This is simply all we can find really if we're looking at the FBI, because they have voluntary reporting. So that means that if the departments want to voluntarily report use of force incidents, they can. And this is because the states generally, because of the 10th Amendment, control the role of the police in their states to a broad degree. So that tiny top bar at the top, those are the number of incidents reports for use of force that the FBI has. The rest are either departments that have agreed to sign up but have no incident reports magically, or the lower quarter of it, which is police departments that have not signed up at all. And that's what this data is saying here. But I'm just going to move on a little bit in the sake of time. So because there isn't state level statistics on this, over the past few years, journalists and social scientists have been trying to map police violence. And there's a lot of different projects on this. Mapping police violence is one that I think is strong, right? So we know that 33 police officers have been killed on duty this year, and yet 781 people have been murdered because of police use of force all across America. So we are not seeing an equivalent sets of violence. We are not seeing equivalent sets of victimhood. We are not seeing an equivalent problem. We note that 28% of those 780 people killed are Black people, and that is disproportionate to their representation in the population. We also know that so far there have only been 12 days in 2020 where the police did not kill someone. We also know that where you live matters, that it's going to vary differently on the type of state you live in, and that Black people are 3 times more likely to be killed by police. We also know that unlike the 100% cases that have been cleared for people who assault the police and have to face justice in that situation, that between 2013 and 2019, 99% of use of force cases that have led to death have resulted in no crime or no accountability from police officers. And finally, in a recent University of Michigan study, they found that police brutality, the use of force, including asphyxiation, beatings, chemical agents, and medical emergency, a taser or a gunshot, is the 6th leading cause of death for young black men in America. And so this is, we can see policing of Black communities as a public health crisis, as something urgent, right, as much more differently than attacks against the institution of the police. So I'm going to leave it there for now. I'm happy to talk more in discussion, and I want to pass it over to H. May.